Good evening and welcome to Kentucky Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Renee Shaw, and tonight we're talking about medical marijuana. 29 states have legalized medical marijuana. Should Kentucky be next? KET producer Laura Kruger posed that question to some members of the medical community in this report. For the last 5 years, Eric Crawford and Jaime Montalvo have come to Frankfort to persuade lawmakers to legalize medical marijuana in Kentucky. Eric, who is a quadriplegic, suffers from chronic pain and glaucoma. Over the years, Eric has been prescribed a multitude of opioids and muscle relaxers.
And when I take these pills, I'm mean to my wife. I feel crazy. I can't help the words that I say. And sometimes they cause me to hurt worse. And I don't want to be addicted to pills or die from them. Cannabis makes me comfortable.
Jaime, who has multiple sclerosis, also had a negative response to opioids and other prescription drugs.
I've had problems with my liver. I've had problems with other organs in my body. Cannabis is an alternative remedy that actually benefits my entire body, you know, from muscle spasms to lack of sleep to pain, and eventually just better quality of life. Both no longer want to live in fear that using the one drug that eases their suffering will put them in jail.
Right now, I'm scared to death. Legislators should get behind me and other people and listen to what we say when cannabis helps us.
Currently, over 29 states plus the District of Columbia have legalized medical marijuana. 9 of those states plus D.C. have legalized recreational marijuana. According to a 2013 Kentucky Health Issues poll, 78% of Kentuckians are in favor of medical marijuana. Representative John Sims and Senator Steve West, Eric's legislators, recently introduced comprehensive medical marijuana legislation, House Bill 166 and Senate Bill 118. What medical marijuana is doing, it's giving that patient the choice, the liberty, or the freedom to try cannabis to treat their condition. However, the Kentucky Medical Association favors further research. On a recent episode of Kentucky Health hosted by Dr. Wayne Tuckson, 2 pain specialists had this to say.
Your opinion, please. Medical marijuana for pain relief. What do you think?
So I think medical marijuana is a little bit of a misnomer because we don't have any drug out on the market that has a dozen or 2 dozen, or in marijuana's case, 64 different active medical ingredients. And we don't have any dosing regulation. We don't have any dosing recommendations for it. It's not a medical product. It's a recreational product, but it's not a medical product. But there are certain entities within marijuana that I think are worth looking at and have potential. But as a whole product, as marijuana itself, I mean, cocaine comes from the cocoa plant or the cocoa leaf. It's one chemical within a variety of chemicals, just as marijuana has many different properties.
Pat, what is your opinion on that?
Well, I don't like people getting high to get their pain under control. And the THC in the marijuana causes a high. It also is addictive, and they say it's not addictive. It's about as addictive as alcohol. And the argument is that, well alcohol is legal, but we don't want people treating their hip pain with, bourbon every night.
But not every physician shares this perspective. Dr. Don Stacy, a board-certified radiation oncologist from Louisville, has seen the positive effects of cannabis on his patients.
I understand why physicians are not out supporting cannabis. I was skeptical, but I had particular patients who were telling me it was helping them. I've had patients arrested in the middle of treatment for using the only product that was helping them deal with the problems that I was causing that I could not resolve with conventional medicine. So I decided to, research the actual data and look.
Dr. Stacy discovered a 2017 report produced by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine that examined abstracts from over 24,000 studies. The report concluded that cannabis and cannabinoids were helpful for chronic pain, chemo-induced nausea, and muscle spasms from multiple sclerosis.
Do we need more data? Certainly. We need huge, giant phase 3 studies to go into the details of the dosing. Why don't we have that data? Because cannabis is a Schedule I product. It's banned.
Schedule I drugs are those that are considered to have a high potential for abuse, no currently accepted medical use, and a lack of accepted safety for use under medical supervision. Marijuana is classified as a Schedule I drug, along with drugs like heroin, LSD, and ecstasy.
So this sort of becomes a circular argument. You know, they demand research, and you say, well, then lift the ban so we can do the research. And then they say, well, we're not going to lift the ban until you get the research. So, you know, there's no possible way to answer all of these particular objections.
Let us urge the FDA, the NIH, the National Institute of Health, the DEA.
Representative Danny Bentley is sponsoring House Concurrent Resolution 34, which asks federal drug control agencies to, quote, expedite research on the safety and effectiveness of the use of marijuana for certain health purposes.
Who's not deeply moved by the stories of those that are desperate for relief? So it's truly our task to help, not harm them, and the many thousands of others who are also will be harmed by us if, in the name of compassion, we make a hasty, uninformed, unscientific decision that is not our decision to make.
In the meantime, state medical marijuana advocates are tired of waiting for the federal government to respond.
But the issue with medical cannabis is that, you know, we're arresting people. We're arresting and caging people for using a product that we as physicians are failing to relieve particular symptoms. They're finding relief on their own, and then we're arresting them. It's an outrage.
What we know today is that there's never been a death attributed to marijuana. Why are we treating it like it's this lethal drug?
What I hope to happen is this state have the best medical marijuana bill there is in the nation, and people get relief and put up their pills.
To discuss medical marijuana further tonight are State Representative Kimberly Moser of Taylor Mill, State Representative John Sims of Flemingsburg, Dr. Danish Mazumdust, pain management and regenerative specialist, and Jaime Montalvo with Kentuckians for Medical Marijuana. We invite your questions and comments tonight. Join the conversation on Twitter at KYTonightKET. Send email to kytonight@ket.org. Use the web form at ket.org/kytonight. Make sure to check the box that says you're not a robot. Or you may give us a call at 1-800-494-7605. Please include your first and last name in town or county on all messages. Good evening, gentlemen and lady. Thank you for being here. I think of all of the topics that we've had on Kentucky Tonight, the most desired conversation that we have yet to have has been around medical marijuana. So I anticipate this to be a very high viewership call tonight, and we appreciate you all being here to talk about this very important issue. I do want to kind of set some terms straight first, and to talk about what we're talking about. When we talk about medical marijuana, are we talking about smoking, vaporized, pill form, all of the above? What do we mean when we say medical marijuana? And I'll let whoever wants to go first answer that first. Dr. Mazumdust?
So I think this is an argument of nomenclature for the most part, because there are properties within marijuana that have value and are worth looking at for research purposes and future drug development. However, medical marijuana, the term itself, is referencing the entirety of the plant, the entirety of the marijuana plant. You can get a lot of the same bioactive properties out of hemp without the THC or other medications or chemicals within it that have some psychoactive properties. So for the most part, I think there's value in looking at it, but really if we're focusing on medical marijuana, I think there's some concerns that need to be addressed.
And we do want to make it clear tonight that we're not talking about hemp. We know that CBD oil that can come from hemp, but we're sticking strictly to the marijuana plant. So I'll ask your seatmate here, Representative Moser, should marijuana be legalized for medicinal purposes?
Well, I think medical marijuana itself is a bit of a misnomer, as Dinesh has said in the past, because we're talking about a plant, the whole plant. It's not it does have medical qualities. There are medicinal properties that can be extracted from the cannabinoids, which we've talked about a little bit before, or at least I have.
Right.
I've had many conversations. And, we are talking about a plant which is not FDA approved or regulated. So, you know, should it be legalized? Well, I don't believe that marijuana itself should be recreationalized, if that's the question. But for medical marijuana, marijuana itself, the plant, is not a medication because it hasn't been regulated by the FDA any more than any other natural product. We have natural products, but we don't use them. We don't chew willow bark for aspirin, and we don't take digitalis for in its whole leaf form necessarily for heart disease. So I think that, you know, there's quite a bit of work to be done before we legalize marijuana. I'm not opposed at all to allowing folks to use the properties for relief, but I think that we really don't have the science yet.
So if we were to ask the question, is marijuana medicine, you would say short answer is no.
Right.
And you would?
Absolutely no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to this side of the table, 400 plus chemical compounds, including the most harmful compounds, are found in tobacco smoke when we talk about cannabis. So to your point, we heard you in the video, Jaime, talking about how it's been beneficial to you as someone who deals with multiple sclerosis. So in your eyes, do you view medicinal marijuana that has medical properties that helps you deal with the effects of your ailment?
Yes, actually, multiple sclerosis is one of the conditions that's most studied with medical cannabis. And with what Representative Moser and Dr. Maas is saying, I would agree most medicines go down a specific path. But what Senate Bill 118 and House Bill 166 are doing are giving that patient the liberty, the freedom, the choice to try cannabis. It's not really telling them exactly how to use it, how much to use, but it's giving them that freedom to actually try to see if that will help their condition. We're not telling them exactly how to use it or that it is going to help a specific condition, whether it's your muscle spasms, pain. But again, it's just about giving them that freedom.
And so to Representative Sims, you are the sponsor of House Bill 166. There is a companion bill, Senate Bill 118. You are in the process, I believe, of modifying your bill to mimic more of what Senator Stephen West in the Senate is proposing with his Senate Bill 118. What does your bill do when it is revised? Let's go there.
The difference between House Bill 166 and Senate Bill 118 is on the back end of it is to do with the funding mechanism for it and taxes and stuff, because all the revenue has to come from the House side, not the Senate side. So that's it. And there's just a few small changes, words here or there that are changed.
Right. Do you expect much revenue from a medical marijuana measure?
We do, and we're going. 20% of that revenue goes back into the localities. For extra police enforcement, drug recognition experts, and to help with the communities.
So, if you could give us a 2-minute elevator speech on what a revised House Bill 166 would do.
It would. It's a big bill.
It's a big bill.
It's 85 pages.
Right, yes.
The main thing I want to talk about, for all the counties out there, people across the state, it has an opt-in option. The local folks get to vote on this if they want it in their communities or not. It's not a bill we pass and it automatically goes to every county.
So it's like a wet, dry vote for alcohol sales.
Yes, it is.
And so the question would be, would they allow the sale of cannabis for medicinal purposes, or do you know what the question would exactly be posed to?
We haven't got that far yet.
Gotten that far.
Right.
Well, the Senate bill actually did go a little bit further, and it did talk about the wording in the bill has to, or the election process has to come about on a general election year, and it has to just basically say, are you in favor of bringing medical cannabis sales to your local area? And after 2 years, the citizens have the right to bring that vote if the local legislators choose not to.
Okay, so let's back up. So it is not a proposition like some other states have done, referendum, constitutional amendment, that would allow it to happen like we've done with or proposed with casino or expanded gambling. Doesn't do that. Right. The legislature must act first on either one of those bills. And then, as I understand it, in the area development districts, of which there are 15, there could be a system set up to serve people in that area development district. Correct. So on the ballot, does it go to everyone in that particular area development district? All the counties in that particular area development district? Is that how that would work?
So basically what it says is, take for instance in the Louisville area, Jefferson County, we have KIPTA. In Jefferson County,
which is the economic development.
right. So they can choose. Jefferson County can choose to have a cultivation, but so can Oldham County. So through their local election process or local legislators, they can choose to bring that industry to their community. Again, like Representative Sims said, once they vote to bring in the industry to their locality, they get a portion of that revenue back to help police the industry, to help hire new drug recognition experts, so we can find people driving on the road that are actually impaired. Impaired under what? Well, it could be alcohol, it could be marijuana, but it could also be prescription drugs.
And for those who would have to be a card-carrying member, essentially, if they are under not a prescription of medical marijuana, but a recommendation. So I want you to explain how that would work. But they would have to have something that identifies them, if they are pulled over, that they are using marijuana for medicinal purposes.
Right, so this would be a state-approved certificate that a physician would fill out. Now, that physician also has to be state-approved. They have to go through a course that says that they are now approved to give these certificates to their patients, but only if they have an actual relationship with those patients. We're trying to curb the fly-by-night doctors. We have wording in the legislation that says dispensaries cannot recommend physicians, and physicians cannot recommend dispensaries, to curb the pill mill epidemic type situation that we had in the past.
So it's a certificate, but not a prescription. Is
Yes.
there a difference? Is that a difference without a distinction, or is?
Well, there is a difference because in 2014 we passed Senate Bill 124, which was an oil bill. In that bill, it asked for physicians to give a prescription and hospitals to dispense. Neither one of those things can actually occur because it's a Schedule I drug, so a physician can't actually give you a prescription for it.
So I want to hear this side. So you've heard a little bit more about the bill, and we talked a little bit about some of the licensing, but we'll get more into that a little later. Does that give you any more comfort with what they're proposing? And I'll start with you, Representative Moser.
Well, I appreciate very much that they've taken such care to really put it back into local control, I suppose. But it doesn't change the fact that this is a Schedule I drug. It is federally illegal. And the reason that it must be recommended by a physician and not prescribed is because a physician would put his or her DEA license on the line if they had to prescribe it. So I still think that, I would like to get back to the fact that we need more science to prove that this is really going to provide those medicinal qualities that anecdotally we hear that it does. We can't even research it properly because it is a Schedule I drug. And that's part of the problem. I would be in favor of having the federal government lift those restrictions so that we can research it and actually get the science that we need, because we know that there probably are some compounds and medicinal qualities. We just don't know what they are, and we don't know how to dose that. And so smoking marijuana is not dosing marijuana. It's not dosing the compound. Would you agree?
Yeah, Dr. Moser.
There's no dosage that you can give, and there's no medicine on the market that you would say, take it to effect. We have no idea how much you're getting in each dose that you're taking. I mean, nicotine is a product within cigarettes. It's acting on a receptor in the body that can be used for Parkinson's disease, for attention deficit disorder, for depression. But no physician would go out there and say, smoke a pack of cigarettes a day in order to get the benefits from it. The reality is you're not getting just some medicinal products when you use marijuana. You're also getting a lot of other products that we know are harmful, that cause psychosis, that cause decreased birth weight in children, that cause attention issues and motivational issues. So there are a lot of other properties to marijuana that really negate the quote-unquote medicinal properties to it.
The Journal of American Medical Association reported that opioid overdose deaths had fallen 25% in states that have legalized medical marijuana. As you heard Jaime say in the piece before we started our conversation, that medical marijuana is non-lethal, and considering that data is being presented by a reputable association, what is there to be against? If it actually can help in reducing the rate of opioid deaths.
That's the assumption. That's the
So
assumption that
what the American Medical Association says is an assumption and not based on fact.
No, so the assumption is that there's a utility to using it in reducing opioid overdoses. The reason people are overdosing on opioids is not because they're undertreated for pain. It's because pain has been mismanaged for decades. That opioids were not the ideal solution to pain. And now we have an addiction problem that's far surpassed the pain problem that we had. So just the fact that introducing another chemical substance of dependency formation for another one, it doesn't negate the fact that this is a safer, it doesn't prove the fact that this is a safer medication. It's just that we're treating addiction from one problem with another problem.
So from Phyllis Dries and Stamping Ground, this web form message, is the pain management physician on the panel aware that research shows that THC oil, not hemp CBD oil, can be effective for glioblastoma, multiform brain tumors? What about right to try laws applying to THC for diseases that are currently incurable?
So I'm not familiar with that specific research, but I can tell you that there are a plethora of conditions for which multiple cannabinoid products can be helpful. We know nothing about the majority of those things. We know some things about THC and some things about CBD, and we know that the harms of THC are not worth, for the most part, for most cases, not worth the benefits, and that's the vast majority. So the majority of patients that do derive some benefit from marijuana, it's primarily from the CBD, and CBD can be concentrated in much greater concentrations in other products like hemp. So the whole argument for another product out there that introduces some therapeutic value is kind of a moot point, given the fact that we already have something out there that's a nutraceutical or supplement that can be utilized legally.
Dr. Muslim-Dust, you're going to get a lot of questions since you're our physician tonight. And this one comes from Gary Hall from Davis County. He says, Mr. Hall says, I'm director of Substance Use Prevention Center, and through the years I've asked medical doctors how much training they received on addictions and non-medical use of street drugs. It has varied widely, but most express not nearly enough as they practice medicine. Do you see this changing in medical schools? That's a very good question.
I don't. I think it's grossly undereducated, both on the pain front and the addiction front. And I have to stress that these are two very different fronts. You can't lump them in the same thing. We've introduced a medication to treat pain that has a lot of addiction properties to it, and it was never the ideal solution. Now we're trying to backtrack on that and undo decades of misinformation, decades of bad management.
Look at what Purdue Pharma did today.
Exactly. And what happened with opioids, we're on the cusp of that with potentially marijuana. Now, some would argue it's not as addictive, you don't overdose from it. That's not quite true. You can overdose from marijuana, especially with dabbing, which is the high concentration THC products. You can have withdrawal effects. You can have addiction from it. In fact, studies will show that 5 out of 10 chronic users have addiction properties to marijuana. So it's not the safe drug that we can just leap forward, open Pandora's box, and then when we realize that there are problems with it, we can reel it back. Just as how we're not reeling it back with opioids, and we're having this huge quagmire of how do we deal with all these patients.
And Mr. Montalvo, I want to get your response. Are we on the cusp of what is happening with opioids? Could we be on that precipice with marijuana?
Actually, I'd like to bring up another study that was recently done out of the Georgia University, which found a 12% reduction in opioid prescriptions and a 17% reduction in nausea prescription. Those are both the same conditions that were found in a National Academy of Science study to be helpful or to be helped with cannabis. So patients are saying it's helpful for pain. The data is showing that Medicare prescriptions for pain and nausea are going down. That again is showing that patients are using it medicinally. Now, what I'd like to touch on is I've attended a lot of meetings in Frankfurt. There's been a lot of slideshows going on. They've talked about many deaths from opioids. They've talked about deaths from Neurontin. Where are the deaths from marijuana? We arrest 15,000 people a year here in Kentucky. Obviously, those aren't all medicinal, but is there a death related directly to marijuana? And no one can ever say that because there is none. The FDA data actually shows that it's not possible to die from marijuana. So the question is, if it's not possible to die from it, is it right to prosecute that patient who's potentially dying, for trying to get a better quality of life?
Russ Smith from Greene County asked this question in a web form, and it says to Dr. Moser, if a person is sick from chemo treatment, do you think it's better to take OxyContin than smoke a medical joint?
I think neither one. OxyContin's not going to treat the nausea, first of all. And you're talking about the lesser of two evils does not make it a good. It's not that there isn't value to compounds within marijuana. It's that what's the prudent way to introduce these values without introducing the same harms. And I'm saying that this argument is premature. I mean, there are vetted ways to go about addressing a medical need that we ought to be pursuing.
Well, why doesn't the federal government do that? And I know that your colleague, Representative Danny Bentley, who's a pharmacist, got through the House Concurrent Resolution 34 that encourages the federal government to expedite research on medical marijuana. But we also know that, like the National Institute for Drug Abuse, they're not in the business of finding the efficacy of marijuana. They're only about researching the harmful effects. So are you asking an agency to look for the good when they're trained to look for the bad?
Right. Well, I would hope that lifting the restriction would allow for anyone to do the research. I think that that's really. I know that his resolution called on NIDA, but I really think that there are
which is the National Institute for Drug Abuse.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So there are other organizations who can research. I mean, University of Kentucky and University of Louisville are fully equipped to do research if we would allow that.
Right.
So, and I would just like to add that we do have medications which are FDA approved that treat things like nausea and some of the ill effects of chemo, and so we have some FDA approved drugs that we know are effective and that we know are safe. We know that we can dose them appropriately, and again, I'll just get back to, we don't know the dose, we don't know the efficacy really of it. It's really anecdotal at this point.
And Representative Sims, do you think, I know that you're the sponsor of your bill, and Stephen West, who's a Republican, and the Senate has a similar bill, but do you think it's wise to let the federal government work and research first to prove the efficacy and safety of this before states start taking on? I mean, 29 other states have done it, which makes me wonder, are they doing it illegally?
That's the thing, we're dragging, the federal government drags their feet on it. So, since I've came out about this bill, I've had hundreds of stories, personal stories, told to me from folks, we were at this, we were doing this, taking this, and we tried this, and it made a difference. So that's why I went to sponsor the bill, for my constituents at Crawford's. He came and saw me one day in my business and had a big old bag full of pills. Like, what are you doing? He said, he told me a story. He was in a car wreck and on the pain pills and opioids and stuff, and he couldn't function during the day. So he started doing medical cannabis, and it helped him. Helps him with the glaucoma. Newsweek, this is, I don't know if you've seen this or not, it's here, it's 29 states plus the District of Columbia. It's time to do something in Kentucky and not be last like we are in everything else.
But the federal government prohibits it. So how, I mean, this is just a question for the city.
Hemp's prohibited too. It's the same. It's the
but
same.
29 other states have found a way to make it happen. Jaime, how did they make it happen?
Well, their legislators, it's been half and half. Half of them have been through constitutional amendments.
Propositions, as they may call them there.
But the most recent state to actually change their marijuana laws was right after Jeff Sessions made his statement a few weeks ago in January. Vermont decided to actually legalize cannabis altogether. Now, they legalized it for citizens in Vermont to grow and to possess and consume. They did not legalize the industry. That's what's in question with the federal government. Today, here in Kentucky, the federal government does not go after citizens. They may go after big enterprise that's making money illegally. And that's the question with the federal government. If we bring in medical cannabis sales to Kentucky, will the federal government go after those business people?
Right.
The federal government's not going to go after patients who are actually possessing and consuming for themselves.
Or the physicians who may recommend, not prescribe
Yeah.
that. There was a question about the doctors that I received earlier in the day, that doctors would be on the hook if Kentucky were to go this route, that this would be a liability for them. Dr. Moser, do you see that being a liability for doctors if it is gone through legal channels and you're able to prescribe, recommend, however? Do you think it's a liability for doctors down the road?
You know, that's more of a question to ask our politicians and our lawyers, because I really can't speak to that. I would like to pose one question that's come up from this discussion is, why do we not talk about medical hemp? Hemp has a lot of the properties that we talk about that are of medicinal value in marijuana,
Right.
but we don't talk about medical hemp. We've never even heard the term medical hemp.
Right.
But the reality is, even the DEA allows for some research on CBD, which is a derivative in much greater concentrations found in hemp than it is in marijuana.
So today, didn't the House, you all acted on a resolution asking Congress to remove hemp from the definition of marijuana in the Federal Controlled Substances Act. That killed a House committee, actually, this afternoon. That was the House Elections and Constitutional Amendments Intergovernmental Affairs Committee. Either one of you serve on that committee. I should know this.
I was not there.
So, but what are your thoughts on, we don't really want to confuse the two with hemp, but it was brought up, so we want to just, while we're here, what do you think of that?
I believe the federal government is differentiating that now. I think that there is some legislation that they're working on to separate those two plants, if you will. They're really the same plant, but
Male and female.
But one contains THC, which we know, and one doesn't.
And hemp does not contain the THC.
Right, a very minute amount.
Yes.
If I can touch on that, the term medical hemp has really come about since the federal farming law came about. Now, that term really, in federal government's definition of hemp, hemp is only the fibers and the stalk of the cannabis plant. It is not the flowers, it's not the buds or the leaves. And where you get the oils is the flower or the leaves. Therefore, the question is that product still a Schedule I drug? And the FDA actually had a statement back in July, I believe, of this past year in 2017 that reaffirmed CBD oil is a Schedule I drug. So what we have here in Kentucky is a medical cannabis program without much oversight from the state government. Patients today are using this CBD oil, and it's not tested for quality. It might be covered in pesticides, herbicides, molds, contaminants, and you have patients with really immunocompromised using dirty products. And in our bill, in Senate Bill 118 and House Bill 166, we're actually asking for those products to be lab tested. We're asking for products for oral consumption to be limited to 10 milligrams per serving, so that the patient knows what they're ingesting is guaranteed to be 10 milligrams per serving. That product is stamped with an identifiable mark, so our children actually aren't getting their hands on it. It's got to be in an opaque bottle, in a child-proof container. Again, we want to look at this like a public safety issue. We all have children. We don't want our children getting their hands on it, just like I don't want my child getting his hands on alcohol or my pills. It's up to me as a responsible parent and adult to keep it away from my child.
What does law enforcement, I'm sure you've had these conversations as the negotiator of this bill, Representative Sims, what does law enforcement express to you are their major concerns? And we don't have a spokesperson from them on tonight, but I know you've probably had conversations with them.
There are some concerns from law enforcement. FOP's behind it, since there's some funding for the pension thing, you know, the good versus the evil. But we're still working on it. We're communication back and forth, and so hopefully they'll be okay with it.
Right. What do you feel about getting more research? And when, I mean, did you vote for House Concurrent Resolution 34?
I did.
So you feel the necessity to have more research, but at the same time, you think Kentucky should go ahead and get out in front.
Take a step. Let's go.
Take a step and let's go. So the possibility that the Senate has its own version, what do you gather from your Senate brethren and sisterin about their appetite to pass this bill? I mean, it does have a Republican sponsor, so in a Republican-controlled Senate, so that improves the chances.
Because it's still going to be, if we pass this, it's still going to be 3 years from now before we see any the effects or anything go into service, as you would say. Senator Dan Simon has a full-blown recreational marijuana bill that he's sponsored in the Senate, and Steve West sponsored, Senate Bill 118. I haven't really had communication with them. We've been busy on our side of the house trying to get stuff done.
Right. I want to remind folks that you're watching Kentucky Tonight. Good evening. I'm Renee Shaw, and we're talking about medical marijuana. And we're going to dip our toe a little bit into recreational because some people believe, Jaime, that when we talk about medical marijuana, that's just a ruse to move to recreational. Your retort to that, and then I want to get this side's perspective.
Well, first, we're patients pushing for medical cannabis. We're not here to talk about recreational. We focused in our legislation, House Bill 166, to focus on patients with qualifying conditions. Now, recreational marijuana, some states have moved towards that. I think by my research, or our research, has actually been because law enforcement has an issue identifying between the two. It takes them time. If that product is legal, then they don't have to take the time to actually identify within those citizens whether they're legal patients or they're actually breaking the law. So it's a matter of time.
Yeah. To this side, we have talked about marijuana as a Schedule I drug in the same category as heroin, LSD, and ecstasy. Do you think it falls in the same category as those two lethal drugs?
I think marijuana, if we're talking about the whole plant, can, because it does have psychoactive properties, and there are some harms of that, which are well documented. I mean, you can overdose on it, especially with the high concentration THC products. Your overdose doesn't necessarily mean respiratory depression, not being able to breathe, and therefore death, but there are some serious adverse consequences to taking an excessive amount of THC. So,
and I wanted to ask you, as a pain specialist, regenerative specialist, what do you advise your patients? And have you scaled back your prescription of opioids because of maybe the propensity of some to become addicted?
I was never a proponent of opioids. In fact, I think that is the absolute worst mistake we've made in medicine, is to presume that opioids were the solution to chronic pain. It really isn't. And that's a whole different argument and a whole different conversation, but it's a lot more detailed than what I think is currently conversed about in the public sphere. As far as cannabinoids and the use of pain, yes, I do think that there's some value to it. And I do think that there's a lot of research need. But there's also some immediate accessibility issues, particularly with the 2014 Farm Bill and the Kentucky being a pilot program for commercial hemp. I think there are options available, but what we really need to do is make a differentiation between the medicinal components, which we could easily say CBD or hemp as medicinal, and the potential recreational components of marijuana as a whole plant. Because the states that have legalized that have also seen increases in impaired driving, increases in fatalities in motor vehicle accidents, a decrease in birth weight of children, an increase in children overdosing or inadvertent consumption, especially when you've got all these products that have these child-friendly marketing appeals to them. I think that's really an ethical
That's what I was going to touch on. I think that we've seen, we can learn from some of what's happened in other states. We do have a lot of states who have legalized either medicinal marijuana or recreational, and we are seeing that we have a higher, there is an increase in the fatalities. The DUIs and driving under the influence and fatalities related to marijuana. We see a higher use in youth. And these are not folks who are being prescribed or having this so-called drug or medicine, rather, prescribed to them or recommended. They're getting their hands on this, and it is marketed to children in edibles in the form of gummy bears and Oreo cookies, and the dose, incidentally, of a gummy bear is an ear and a leg. So I find that really difficult to understand, and I think that the THC levels are not as regulated as as they really intended. And I'm not exactly sure why, and I'm happy to see that you've taken some clear steps to really address that. But I do worry that we will get into situations where the THC levels are all over the place. It's really not as regulated as we thought it should be. We also see that only about 2 to 3% of the folks who are using medicinal marijuana are cancer patients or have, a serious ailment. They really are more about self-reported back pain and things that make it pretty easy to get a medical card. I think the average age is 30 to 35-year-old male with back pain. So, I just question whether or not these are legitimate diagnoses. And I also, I guess, question, if the delivery system needs to be smoking marijuana, whether or not it's intense, if your intent or not your intent, but, some of the proponents' intent is not to step into recreational. So, I mean, that's a concern. And I think that, right, and we do have ways to derive the effective compounds and really extract those from hemp and even fractured marijuana. We have Epidiolex, which has come from marijuana, and it's used for severe forms of seizure disorders, or to treat. So, we have some things that are being worked on. With research, we are seeing that these drugs are being developed and they're being FDA approved, and that is the process that we have right now to make sure that we have safe and effective medications.
So let's break down all of her arguments there. Let's start with the one about drug driving. When we think about all the distractions we have in our car now, what a tragedy would be for someone who was high and texting to run into someone innocently and cause them bodily harm. And so to those who have concerns, you mentioned this is a public safety issue in your perspective, but I think Representative Moser is making a public safety argument for why it should not be legalized.
Right. Well, the data is actually, if you look at the National Traffic Association or the National Traffic and Highway Administration, they actually found that since 1990, we're at a record low for traffic fatalities. And that is during a time when we've actually made cannabis like the legalization, or cannabis, they've had medical cannabis since 1996, so it's become more lenient over that time. Now, children actually getting their hands on it has also gone down since 1990. SMART actually just released their data and their finding, and they found that it was at a record low as well. Now, during this time, teen use has gone up and down 2% or so, which is the margin of error. But teen use, it's not spiking as you would think. And the reason, in my opinion, is because you're putting business owners behind these licenses, and they have a $100,000 investment. And just like with alcohol, they're not going to want to sell to somebody who is underage or somebody who's not supposed to go into their store, because they are putting that license at risk and their $100,000 investment at risk.
Representative Sims, I want to come to you, but for the moment, I just want to remind folks that you are watching and listening to Kentucky Tonight. Good evening, I'm Renee Shaw, and we're talking about medical marijuana. Representative Sims, I want to go to your bill and some of the licensing issues and how that would work, and to Representative Moser's point about legitimate folks who have a, however it's termed in the bill, a legitimate medical need, and not just saying I have lower back pain, that there would be a set of rules to govern that process. So if you could kind of detail that for us.
We got to remember our veterans too, Renee. They have this
Absolutely.
PTSD. They've seen horrible things overseas and come back home, and their suicide rate is it's unreal for veterans. And Kentucky is, I think, the 4th state with the highest number of veterans that live here in the state. So we got to take care of those folks. The licensing. Yes,
the licensing. If you could go into that.
Well, you have to have a qualifying condition, which is a multitude of conditions. Now, to touch on what Representative Moser...
And are those defined in the bill?
Yes, they are. Actually, you have to have a relationship with your physician.
Right.
There is one that is kind of all-encompassing, which is severe debilitating back pain. But, and to touch on what Representative Moser was talking about, most of the patients are severe chronic pain, and that is correct. Because when you suffer from multiple illness, it's not that kidney doctor, it's not your, your neurologist giving you that recommendation. It's more than likely going to be that pain management doctor that ends up giving you that recommendation. So you end up getting it for chronic pain, not for your muscle spasms, not for your brain cancer. It's chronic pain.
And so I was just going to ask our pain specialist here, do you see a lot of your colleagues writing scripts or recommendations for medical marijuana in order to manage their chronic pain?
I don't. I don't for a number of reasons. One is that back pain is one of the most poorly understood things in the country. I think that we have really deviated from getting a better understanding of back pain in lieu of or in favor of just a quick fix medication management. And there's nothing you can do as far as managing pain that just suppresses the signal without addressing the damage. And there's no medication that's going to be able to turn off the alarm bells in your brain if you're trying to walk on a broken foot. It's going to change. So as far as that being an indication for medical marijuana, I don't really see the value of that. I do have patients who take CBD, and I do see improvements in that, but it's been a surprise to me as what has been helpful, what conditions have benefited from it and what hasn't. And that goes to show that the research really isn't there. We don't know exactly who's going to benefit from it more than who's going to get harmed from it. You mentioned veterans a little bit earlier. As far as the psychotropic effects, we know that marijuana has a rebound effect where the kind of the calming effect that it has can then evolve into a rebound agitation. Patients who have bipolar, for instance, can be put into mania as opposed to be calmed by it just simply because of that rebound effect and the difference in how it's processed through the body, because it's a lot of the cannabinoids are fat soluble, meaning they'll get absorbed into the fat and then they'll leak out very slowly over time. Now, how quickly that leaks out, if it leaks out here and here simultaneously and all of a sudden you get the surge, it's an unpredictable, what we call pharmacokinetics, or how your body processes a drug. Without knowing better background science behind the medications, I think it's Russian roulette to just introduce it on the global market and just hope that the right patients get it and the wrong ones don't.
I want to go back to the licensing because you were talking about it's limited to particular conditions. They have to have a qualifying physician to give them that certification. So any more you'd like to share about the details of that as it's detailed in the bill? Or is that
for the licensing or the
patient?
patient?
Licensing.
Well, the patient.
And then we can talk about for the patient as well.
For licensing for business, again, it has to be opt-in. There are multiple different types of business licensing, such as a cultivator, a processor, a producer. Now, a cultivator grows it, a producer makes a finished raw product, the processor makes something from it. They make a product that's quality controlled. That quality control step is actually an independent third party that checks that product for quality. They check for mold, contaminants, heavy metals, and quality of the product. How much cannabinoids does it have? The exact data that we need as patients to know. If it's going to help us.
Right. And the state would have control at each step of that process, depending on who it is.
Right. It would be a new department under the Public Protection Cabinet, which is where gambling is, where alcohol is, and they would license it through this department, the Cannabis Administration. They would approve or deny patients or business.
And making sure that you talked about a relationship with the doctor to make sure that you qualify, that your physician qualifies and that your condition also qualifies. And the important thing of the bill is that it's a local referendum. Now, not like this on the state level, but that will let the local communities decide whether or not to proceed. Are you hearing from, let's say, county judge executives or magistrates that they're for this?
We are. We have some magistrates throughout the state have reached out to me. You know, their family member has used this or something. You know, and we did surveys. I did a survey, and it showed 73% were in favor of medical marijuana in my district alone. And I think they did a survey a few years ago, and it's 80% statewide.
Right.
And you know, and it's from the seed to the sale. It's all tracked. It's all monitored with a tag on the seed till it gets to the finished product. It's all wrote down, secured, and you know where it happens and where it is long.
Many people have said that marijuana is a gateway drug, and Representative Moser, and whenever you get a chance not to sleep and be in Frankfurt, you're also running the Office of Drug Control Policy in Northern Kentucky. I don't know when you do that, but I know that lots of people in that position, state level, Van Ingram and others, you know, they have some really bright lines when it comes to this discussion because of what they see in opioid addiction and elsewhere. So your position is also informed by what you see and what's happened in Northern Kentucky, which at one time was considered ground zero when it comes to opioid addiction.
Right, and I have some big concerns when it comes to the opioid issue. When I talk to recovering heroin addicts or folks who have had or recovered from or maybe are in the throes of a substance use disorder, they often tell me that their gateway drug, their first drug of use was marijuana. I'm not saying that, you know, that necessarily always leads to certainly a heroin addiction, but you position yourself with any substance use and you kind of normalize it. I mean, it really becomes a way of coping. And I don't think that this is really a coping skill that we would like to encourage our children to use. So yes, we have a huge opioid problem. We lose 60,000 people a year. That's 150 people a day to opioids. And I'm not sure that introducing another substance, another intoxicant into our society is necessarily a good thing. I would also add that it's probably a really bad idea to have legislators decide what drugs are safe and effective.
From Bruce Hadley, this tweet from Columbia, Kentucky, he says, I'm wondering if any of the doctors there on the panel or legislators have an immediate family member under their home roof that live with debilitating chronic pain.
I mean, I see it every day. You can't tell me I don't have a heart-to-heart connection with my patients. I really do. I mean, I feel for them. And the reason I do what I do I mean, I was injured when I was a teen and I had a really bad back injury for quite a while. There's a reason that I do what I do, but I also know that it's a very vulnerable population that you can promise the world to. You could promise a pea to, and they'll see it as the world. And to manage that patient population in a safe way doesn't mean rushing into something that could be a good idea in the short run and a terrible idea in the long run. I mean, opioids are exactly that example. I'm not saying that there isn't value to it. I'm not saying that there aren't patients out there who derive benefit from some form of hemp or marijuana. All I'm saying is that there's not enough information to make this mainstream. You talked about teenagers' use of marijuana going down. How many teenagers do we know who use alcohol, something that's not supposed to be accessible to teenagers? Plenty. And what's going to happen when marijuana becomes more mainstream? We already have plenty of data that shows that teenagers their brains don't develop until they're in their mid-20s. Regardless of what your teens tell you, they're not developed yet. And if we're introducing another chemical in the mainstream that has a lot of addictive potential or chemical coping potential, that brain is never going to develop in a way that it should, where it can face the adversities of life, it can deal with the challenges and overcome rather than seek some other escape route being chemical.
Does your bill address age of consent legal? I mean, I would assume is there an age?
Yes, it allows for pediatric use. They need to have a parent or guardian who signs off along with a physician. Now, to touch on the teen use and such, in Kentucky here, the polling is actually showing that teens in Kentucky find marijuana easier than alcohol or cigarettes. So the question is, why is that? Is it because prohibition is actually making it easier for them to get their hands on it because it's not licensed?
Interesting. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I have read the Rocky Mountain Hyde report, and I kind of keep tabs on the different percentages of use. And Colorado, after they legalized marijuana, are #1 in teen use, and Kentucky is, I think, number 49 right now. So, you know, we haven't seen an explosion in use. Now, I'm sure it's I'm sure it's everywhere, and I'm sure it is easy to get. I don't know if the black market affects that or not. But, you know, we are seeing increased use in states that legalize marijuana.
You don't get rid of the black market by legalizing.
Right.
No, you're right.
Because the black market actually
Exactly.
thrives. There are economic models that have demonstrated this, that once you make it more liberal, that the black market actually has greater access, because there's always going to be a market for people trying to circumvent the tax revenue. And when it comes to the tax revenue, if you look at alcohol and tobacco, the differential between the overall societal harms, be it health issues, motor vehicle accidents, etc., the cost differential is usually 16 to 1. The tax revenue that's generated is usually 1/16 of what the societal cost is. We're not going to compensate that with any kind of tax revenue.
And to the point, I think there is some question about how much medicinal marijuana would generate for tax revenue, but certainly recreational marijuana, as Senator Dan Syme has proposed as a way to help pay for the pension crisis. When you think of it in terms of 1/16 of the benefit weighed against society, does that give you a different picture of where we need to go in Kentucky?
Well, the actuarial or the budget and looking into revenue hasn't been done yet. What this would cause is job generation across the state. If somebody has to grow it, produce it, process it, package it, check it, those are jobs. Jobs across the state that right now are in the black market. And if we're not regulating it, we're not, you know, we're still prosecuting patients.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. This was a good educational discussion. I've learned a lot, and I hope that you, our viewers at home, have learned a great deal too. Thank you all for being here. I'm sure we'll have another discussion sometime soon. Tune in Friday night at 8/7 Central for Comment on Kentucky with Bill Bryant. Thanks for watching. For KET, I'm Renee Shaw, and I'll see you later. Good night. Have a good week.